I finally saw Driving Miss Daisy.
Finally saw
Yeah.
that James.
I know. I understand, I know. I know.
I wouldn't even admit that.
Driving Miss Daisy nearly got passed over before becoming one of the biggest Oscar shocks ever. A quiet film with no explosions or car chases somehow won Best Picture and made many times its initial budget. However, the real story is even wilder. Lucille Ball helped change its fate. Morgan Freeman was told he was too young for the role that made him famous, and major stars passed on the film. And there are even more crazy facts waiting to be revealed. So how did Driving Miss Daisy pull off one of cinema's biggest surprises? Join us as we count down 28 weird facts about this film. Number 28. The 74-seat theater on 42nd Street. Before Jessica Tandy and Morgan Freeman were collecting awards at the Berlin Film Festival, Driving Miss Daisy was a tiny off-Broadway play that Alfred Uhry genuinely expected nobody outside his immediate family to care about. Alfred wrote the play as a family memoir. He thought the appeal was limited to people who had grown up in that specific world, city, and era. The production was scheduled for 5 weeks in a 74-seat theater on the far west side of Manhattan, 2 flights up on 42nd Street. It was a tiny room where the producers figured they would play to whatever small audience showed up close quietly and move on. So what was the very first thing that happened when the film adaptation was announced that almost stopped the whole production before it started? Number 27. Major studio in Hollywood passed on it. When producer Richard Zanuck tried to get a major studio to finance the film adaptation, he was turned away by every single one of them. The studio's reasoning was consistent and, by their logic, perfectly sensible. The story was too small. The cast they were proposing, an 80-year-old actress, a 52-year-old black man playing a chauffeur, was not commercially viable. There were no action sequences, no romance, no obvious hook for a marketing campaign. What were they going to put on the poster? 2 old people in a car? Warner Bros. Eventually agreed to distribute the film, but did not want to finance it. The money had to be assembled from independent sources. A $7.5 million budget cobbled together outside the studio system in the same year that Batman was making $251 million for Warner Bros., and everyone in Hollywood had decided that bigger was the only direction that made sense. But even before the money was sorted, the casting process had a problem that nobody saw coming. Number 26. Lucille Ball wrote a letter asking not to be considered. During the casting process for Daisy Worthen, a significant number of Hollywood's older actresses expressed interest in the role. And then there was Lucille Ball. Lucille wrote directly to producers Richard and Lily Finney Zanuck, asking them not to consider her for the role of Daisy. She knew her health was declining, and she was aware of the physical demands of the role. Sadly, she died on April 26, 1989, and didn't get to see the movie become a success. So if Lucille Ball was out and Lauren Bacall was considered too young, how exactly did Jessica Tandy get the role? Number 25. Jessica Tandy was 80 years old. Richard Zanuck suggested Jessica Tandy for the role of Daisy, and the reasoning was simple. She was exactly the right age, and most of the actresses who wanted the part were not. Lauren Bacall, for example, was considered too young. The schedule stipulated that Tandy should work only a few hours a day, given her age and her health. But it became impossible because the budget only allowed for 31 shooting days, and the schedule had to be maintained regardless of what the original plan had been. Now here is the thing about Morgan Freeman getting cast alongside her. The director almost didn't give him the part. And the reason why is one of the stranger pieces of logic in this entire story. Number 24. Too young for the role. Morgan Freeman originated the role of Hoke Colburn in the original off-Broadway production. He had played the character for 3 years in the play that won the Pulitzer Prize. He knew Hoke Colburn better than anyone alive. When the film adaptation was announced, Morgan went backstage to meet Bruce Beresford after a performance of the play and asked directly whether he was getting the part. Bruce told him he was a little young for it. Morgan was 52, and Hoke in the story is 60. Morgan went home expecting the part to go to someone else, but it went to him instead. And what he subsequently said about how he learned to portray a man aging across 25 years is one of the most unexpected pieces of acting advice ever committed to print, which we will get to shortly. But first, what did Dan Aykroyd do to get his role? Because the story of how Bully Worthen was cast is genuinely wild. Number 23. Dan Aykroyd's shocking interaction with the producer. Casting Bully Worthen, Daisy's son, the man who hires Hoke and manages the relationship between them for 25 years, was a problem that nobody on the production anticipated. Warner Brothers was not enthusiastic about either Morgan Freeman or Jessica Tandy and was insisting on a recognizable name in the supporting role to give the film commercial credibility. Bruce approached every actor he could think of whose name carried weight. Their agents were not interested because the role was considered not prominent enough to be worth pursuing. Then one evening, Richard Zanuck got a phone call from Dan Aykroyd. He had read the script and wanted the role, and when Zanuck warned him that the salary was going to be essentially nothing, minuscule by his own description, Aykroyd said that was fine. He was so eager to play a serious dramatic part that he accepted scale pay. He was eventually nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. It paid off in every way except financially. And speaking of the Academy Awards, the film's Oscar performance came with one very surprising omission that has confused people for 35 years. Number 22. The nomination that didn't happen. Driving Miss Daisy won Best Picture at the 62nd Academy Awards. It won Best Actress for Jessica Tandy. It won Best Adapted Screenplay. It won Best Makeup. 9 nominations total, 4 wins, the most decorated film of its year, and the director, Bruce Beresford, was not nominated for Best Director. The Directors Guild of America had also declined to nominate him for their award, which is particularly striking given that both organizations had nominated the film itself as the best of the year. Now, what about the score? Because the music that ties Driving Miss Daisy together was written by someone who was not yet the Hans Zimmer the world would eventually know. Number 21. Hans Zimmer composed the score. The score for Driving Miss Daisy was composed by Hans Zimmer, and it is a beautiful, restrained piece of work that won him a BMI Film Music Award and contributed to establishing him as a composer with genuine dramatic intelligence. The version of Hans Zimmer, who went on to win an Academy Award for The Lion King in 1994, was still being shaped when he was writing the quiet, intimate piano score for an elderly woman and her chauffeur driving through Atlanta in 1989. The biggest film composer in the world got part of his foundation from a $7.5 million movie that every major studio had refused to make. Wow. But what about the actual actors, aging across 25 years? How did Freeman do it? The technique he described is one of the most quoted pieces of acting advice in the industry. Number 20. Morgan Freeman's secret to playing old is the most unexpected thing you'll hear today. Driving Miss Daisy requires Tandy and Freeman to convincingly portray the passage of 25 years, from 1948 to 1973, through changes in makeup, costume, movement, and performance. The film won the Academy Award for Best Makeup, which is recognition that the visual transformation worked, but the makeup only works when the performance underneath it is equally convincing. Morgan Freeman, in a later interview, described how his acting instructor had taught him to portray old age effectively. The technique was to imagine, specifically, that your testicles were made of Christmas ornament balls. The fragility of movement. It is not the technique you expect to find at the center of a Pulitzer Prize-winning film's most celebrated performance. There is a historical detail inside the film itself that has confused audiences for 35 years, a bombing that the film places in completely the wrong year. Number 19. The film got a major historical events date completely wrong. One of the film's most significant dramatic sequences involves the bombing of the temple, the Hebrew Benevolent Congregation Synagogue in Atlanta. an event that deeply affects Daisy and connects her experience as a Jewish woman to the broader experience of discrimination that Hoke navigates as a black man in the Jim Crow South. The bombing of the temple actually occurred on October 12, 1958. In the film, it is depicted as occurring after a scene set in 1966, meaning the production placed a 1958 event 8 years after it actually happened. Hoke is also driving a mid-1960s Cadillac in the scene that surrounds it, which is further evidence that the filmmakers placed the bombing in the wrong era of the story. Nobody caught it before release, and the historically incorrect placement of one of Atlanta's most documented civil rights era events sat inside a Best Picture winner for 35 years before most audiences noticed. Speaking of things that were not quite what they appeared on screen, what about the way the two lead performances were developed? Number 18. Jessica Tandy stayed in character for 31 days. The relationship between Daisy Worthen and Hope Colburn in the film starts from a position of cool distance and genuine hostility. Daisy does not want a chauffeur, does not want to depend on anyone, and certainly does not want to develop a personal relationship with the man her son has hired to drive her. That initial distance is crucial to the film's emotional arc. If it feels performed, nothing that comes after it works. Jessica Tandy maintained Daisy's emotional distance from Freeman between setups throughout the entire production, keeping her off-camera relationship with him at the same temperature that Daisy maintained with Hoke on camera. She did this for 31 shooting days. What about the film's relationship to the play it was adapted from? Because the movie that audiences saw was not identical to what was on stage, and one of the changes was so subtle that most people never noticed it. Number 17. It made the story more honest. Alfred Uhry's play had 3 characters: Daisy, Hoke, and Booley. It had no visual sense of the Atlanta that surrounded them. It was a chamber piece, almost claustrophobic in its intimacy, asking the audience to imagine the world outside the car from the quality of the relationship inside it. The film opened the world up, showed Atlanta across 25 years, showed the synagogue and the community, showed the civil rights movement as background texture rather than dramatic foreground. Alfred described all the events in the play as having really happened one way or another, though he moved things around to serve his dramatic purposes. What the film added most significantly was specificity. The temple bombing that sits in the wrong year is still a real event that Uhry's family lived through. The Martin Luther King Jr. dinner that Daisy attends and that Hoke drives her to, a scene that crystallizes the central irony of a black man driving a white Jewish woman to hear the most important black civil rights leader of the century, is rendered in the film with a visual and emotional completeness that a 3-person stage play could only gesture toward. But here is a thing the film still couldn't solve, something that was embedded in the source material, and that critics have been arguing about ever since the film won Best Picture. Number 16. The NAACP's confused perspective. Driving Miss Daisy is one of the most debated Best Picture winners in Oscar history, not because of its quality, which is not seriously disputed, but because of its racial politics. The argument, made by critics including Spike Lee and many others, is that a film about the civil rights era in the American South, whose central black character is defined almost entirely by his relationship to a white woman, is a troubling representation of what the civil rights era meant, and that giving it Best Picture over Do the Right Thing, which was not even nominated, was a significant statement about whose story Hollywood considered worth telling. The NAACP gave the film an Image Award, specifically commending it for its portrayal of the friendship between Daisy and Hoke. Morgan Freeman himself had complex feelings about the role's legacy. What did he say about it years later? Number 15. A Silver Bear but no Oscar. At the 40th Berlin International Film Festival, Jessica Tandy and Morgan Freeman together won the Silver Bear for Best Joint Performance, one of the very few times the award has been given to 2 performers simultaneously for a single film. The Berlin Festival recognized something in their dynamic that went beyond individual performance into the specific chemistry of two people who had found each other's rhythms completely. At the Academy Awards, Morgan was nominated for Best Actor but did not win. Daniel Day-Lewis took the award that year for My Nine, Left Foot. The irony is sharp. Morgan had given what many considered the more technically demanding performance, aging 25 years, navigating the physicality and emotional restraint of a character defined by what he doesn't say as much as what he does, and left the Oscars without the prize. Now, what was happening with the supporting cast? Because one of the people in this film had a real-world connection to the story. Number 14. Esther Roll had played a maid in real life. Esther Roll plays Idella, Daisy's housekeeper, a woman whose quiet dignity and firm presence in the household is one of the film's underappreciated elements. A character who holds her own space without ever being invited to occupy more of the frame than she is given. What the Driving Miss Daisy trivia pages note, and what most audiences never knew, is that the role of a domestic worker in a Southern household was not entirely foreign territory for Esther personally. She had worked as a domestic before breaking into acting, the life experience that gave her performance in the film a quality of authenticity that you cannot manufacture in preparation. So who else in the cast had a real-world connection to what the film was depicting? Number 13. Alfred Uhry's many awards. Alfred Uhry won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama for the play in 1988. He won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay for the film in 1990. And he subsequently won the Tony Award for Best Book of a Musical for his Broadway production, The Last Night of Ballyhoo, in 1997. He is the only person in history to have won all three of those specific awards for dramatic writing. There was something about the way the film was received that nobody on the production had fully anticipated, because the audience that showed up for Driving Miss Daisy in December 1989 was not the audience anybody had predicted. Number 12. The film was a genuine crossover. December 1989 was not an obvious moment to release a quiet, character-driven drama about an elderly Jewish woman and her black chauffeur in the American South. Batman had come out in June and made $251 million. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade had come out in May and made $197 million. Back to the Future Part 2 was in theaters at the same time as Driving Miss Daisy. Driving Miss Daisy made $145.8 million worldwide on a $7.5 million budget. That is a nearly 20-to-1 return on investment. It was not the biggest film of 1989, but it was among the most profitable. There was one technical achievement the film accomplished that has quietly made it one of the most distinctive entries in Oscar history. Number 11. The only Best Picture winner adapted from an off-Broadway play. Driving Miss Daisy is the only Best Picture winner in Academy Award history to have been adapted from an off-Broadway production. It is a record that still stands. Every other Best Picture winner came from a larger source, bigger theater, bigger book, bigger cultural starting point. The smallest possible starting platform for a theatrical production produced the biggest award in cinema. No. What happened with the film's racial politics after it won? Number 10. Spike Lee called it a magical Negro film. When Spike Lee coined the term super-duper magical Negro to describe a recurring type of black character in Hollywood films, a black character who exists primarily to help white protagonists achieve their goals and whose own life are secondary to the white character's development. He cited Driving Miss Daisy as one of the central examples. The criticism was directed specifically at how Hoke Colburn functions in the film, as a patient, wise, endlessly gracious presence whose primary narrative function is to help Daisy Worthen grow and change, while Hoke's own desires, family, interior life, and experience of racism in the Jim Crow South are glimpsed only briefly. What makes the conversation complex is that Morgan Freeman himself has given varying accounts of how he relates to the film. He has defended the film's portrayal of Hoke as dignified and at other points acknowledged the limitations of the character. Now, let's resume the countdown. Number 9. The entire film was shot in Georgia. The production filmed entirely on location in Atlanta and its surrounding areas, a decision driven partly by authenticity and partly by budget. Since building period-accurate Atlanta sets for a film that spans 25 years of a city's development would have cost considerably more than the actual Atlanta already provided. The film used real Atlanta locations across its span, including the residential neighborhoods of the era. And speaking of the real Atlanta, what happened to the real-world inspiration for the story? Number 8. Daisy Worthen is based on a real woman. Alfred Uhry's grandmother was named Lena Fox. Her chauffeur, who drove her for years across the Atlanta that the film depicts, was named Will Coleman. The relationship between Lena Fox and Will Coleman is the real-world relationship that Uhry observed as a child and carried into the story, changing the names, compressing and dramatizing the events, but maintaining the essential truth of what he had witnessed. Uhry has said that all the events in the play really happened, one way or another, that he moved things around to serve his dramatic purposes, but that the emotional core of every scene was grounded in something he had seen or been told. So here is a question about the film's reception that tells you something important about how far the cultural conversation moved between 1989 and now. Number 7. The film beat Do the Right Thing at the Oscars. The year that Driving Miss Daisy won Best Picture, Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing was not nominated for Best Picture. It received 2 nominations, Best Director for Lee and Best Supporting Actor for Danny Aiello, and won neither. The film that most critics and filmmakers consider the definitive cinematic statement about race in America in the late 1980s was not in the running for the award that Driving Miss Daisy won. And now, back to something genuinely joyful, because the story of how this film actually came together has one more detail that nobody remembers. Number 6. Jessica Tandy had just made another $100 million film. Jessica Tandy won Best Actress for Driving Miss Daisy at 81 years old. The film made $145 million, and the film she made immediately after Driving Miss Daisy, Fried Green Tomatoes, in 1991, also made over $100 million. This means that at 80 and 82 years old, Jessica Tandy was a bigger box office draw than most actors 1/3 her age. She passed away in September 1994 at 85, 4 years after her Oscar win and 3 years after Fried Green Tomatoes. Her final films were making money that studios 30 years her junior would have been proud of. But there is one more casting fact about this film that most people never caught, and it involves someone in the film who was there before any of the famous people arrived. Number 5. The original Miss Daisy was in the film too. Dana Ivey played Daisy Worthen in the original off-Broadway production of the play. The production that ran for 3 years, won the Pulitzer Prize, and it launched everything. She was the first Daisy. When the film was cast and Jessica Tandy took the part, Ivey could have simply moved on. Instead, she appears in the film in a smaller supporting role. 4 more facts to go. And the second to last one is about what happened at the very end of the shoot that nobody planned and everyone remembered. Number 4. Patti LuPone played 2 characters at once. Patti LuPone played Florine Worthen, Booley's socially ambitious wife, a woman whose flirtatious energy and social pretensions provide comic contrast to Daisy's personality. Patti was, at the time of filming, also starring in Life Goes On, the ABC drama series in which she played Libby Thatcher, the matriarch of a family dealing with a child with Down syndrome. The 2 roles could not be more different in tone, which brings us to the third fact, the one that, 35 years later, still lands differently than any other detail about this film. Number 3. The secret. Details of the last scene. The final scene of Driving Miss Daisy is one of the most devastating endings in American cinema. Hoke visits Daisy in the nursing home, now 97 years old, barely lucid, her memory and her certainty of self largely gone. He sits beside her and takes her hands. She tells him he is her best friend. He says no. Go on, Miss Daisy. She says it again, and he says yes. Alfred Uhry wrote that scene after visiting his real grandmother in a nursing home, after sitting with the woman who had inspired the whole story and watching the distance between who she had been and who she now was. He took that grief and put it into the last 4 minutes of his play. And then the film made it permanent. The ending of Driving Miss Daisy left audiences in tears, but the story was not finished. Number 2. The oldest Best Actress winner in Oscar history. At the 62nd Academy Awards in March 1990, Jessica Tandy won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance as Daisy Worthen. She was 80 years old. She remains, to this day, the oldest person ever to win the Academy Award for Best Actress. The record she set in 1990 has stood for 35 years without being broken. Now, to the final fact on the list. Number 1. The real Hoke Colburn was still alive when it won Best Picture. Will Coleman, the man whose genuine friendship with Lena Fox generated one of the most celebrated pieces of American dramatic writing of the 20th century, was still alive when the film won Best Picture in 1990. He had given his story unknowingly to a writer who observed it as a child and carried it for decades before putting it on a stage. If every major studio had said yes in 1988, if this film had been made with a bigger budget and a bigger cast and a studio's marketing machine behind it, would it have become a better film? Or did the scrappiness of how it got made, the scale pay and the 31 days and the tiny budget produce something that a well-resourced production never could have?